Is this thing on? Is this thing on? I feel like that. I do that every year. It's my greeting. Is this thing on? Well, this thing is on. Thank you all for being here, Daphne. That was beautiful. And I wish we could have heard Lights, a song that I also have strong feelings about. As far as
I know.
You see the sideburns on that guy. That's what I want.
This is the most eclectic pop conference panel ever assembled. So Jason King, I got to give it to you. The cosmopolitan wonder that you are. You brought together a fascinating group. I want to say, if you have a seat next to you, can you raise your hand? And there's some people standing. Come sit. Let's take the 20 seconds, and some people come claim some seats here, because there are some seats. We don't want you to have to stand. Okay, so I'm going to try to wing these bios, because you all have Wikipedia. You can look up the massive accomplishments of the people up here with me. So you've met Daphne. To my immediate left is Ishmael Butler. One of the most innovative and fascinating forces in hip-hop, with Digable Planets, with Cherry Wine, and most recently with Shabazz Palaces, a group that really changed the course of hip-hop in a lot of ways, and is still doing brilliant work. Also has a new group called Knife Knights. The most recent albums by Digable Planets, I just want to give a quick plug to, because they're incredible, and they're called Quasars, Born on a Gangster Star, and Quasars versus the Jealous Machines, and they take you on a deep journey through time and space. They are truly epic, funkadelic, rich, sonic wonders. So check those albums. To my right, David Toop. One of truly the most important music writers who's ever lived. We can't believe he's only at the conference first year this year. Has been making music since the early 70s and has been writing about music since the 80s. And his incredible books include the first really crucial book on hip-hop, Rap Attack, the definitive book on ambient music, Ocean of Sound. I could list many more. Exotica, which was a fascinating trip into exactly what the title says. One of my favorites, Haunted Weather, Music, Silence, and Memory. And I could go on, but most recently he has a new book, autobiography called Flutter Echo, that is an autobiography of listening, and it's truly astounding. And it's coming out, when is it coming out in English? It's in May, so please check out that book, Flutter Echo. And then we have Efrim Manuel Menuk, who I have sat at the feet of when I've seen one of my favorite groups, Godspeed You Black Emperor, a group that bends time and space also in a different way. He also has a band called the Silver Mount Zion Band, that Memorial Orchestra, right? That we're going to be talking about a little bit. And it's not really a band, it's more like a revolving ensemble and soul project. And he makes wonderful records under his own name as well. And I encourage you to check them out, especially my favorite, which is called Play Is High Gospel. We're going to talk a little bit about that project. And then to my far right, we have Steve Pear.
Woo!
The voice, what can I say? Frontman for Journey, really one of the most iconic voices in rock and roll. And also, Steve has released several solo albums. 84 is Street Talk, 94 is For the Love of Strange Medicine, and most recently, Traces.
Woo!
So yeah, that's our panel. So I want to start by just saying something about grief. Thinking about grief, it's one of the most personal and idiosyncratic experiences, and also one of the most universal, ritualized, and in some senses abstract. Everyone feels and lives through grief differently and in some ways alone, and yet we have created so much culturally from it, arguably all religion, for example. Music and art are a means to bridge the gap between that completely incomprehensible, inexpressible individual experience of loss, of grief, of haunting, and our culture's sanctions ways of dealing with it. And I want to read just 2 quotes from Flutter Echo, David's new book, that I think can kind of ground this conversation. The first, and both of these are you wrote, David, when you were talking about your own grief after your wife died in the 90s, but they are more general comments. First, he says, I talked at length with my anthropologist friend, Ragnar Johnson, who told me of Australian Aboriginal rituals, which sanctioned anger and aggression in bereavement. Spirits haunting the resting place of the dead were attacked with spears. Our own bereavement rituals are models of self-control, bounded by taboos, silences, and terrors disguised as respect, pursued by unspoken, sometimes spoken expectations that life should return to normal as soon as possible. So see in there is this vast difference in the way different cultures have approached grief. And I think in the Western world, it's arguable that popular music attacks grief with spears sometimes, with something we don't allow ourselves to do otherwise. Another quote says, stubborn, slow, and insistent, grieving's time span is totally opposed to the hype and discard pace that motors our lives. And Daphne and I were talking a little bit about this. I think music is another thing that changes time. Both grief and music challenge the way that we move through time. So those are just a few general thoughts that I had on this subject. So the first question I'd like to throw out to the group is, what does grief do to time? And how, as writers and musicians, do we try to reflect the experience of what grief does to time? And I guess I'll ask you first, David, because I feel you might have something to say.
Well, Ishmael and I were talking upstairs in the green room about Sun Ra. And Sun Ra had a tune called It's After the End of the World, Don't You Know That Yet? And I think, as you say, Anne, everybody has a different approach to grief, but for me it was certainly a feeling that I'd suddenly collided in that way with reality. Musicians, anybody involved with music, whether they be musicians, composers, writers, is dealing at a more or less sophisticated level with time. But suddenly, when this kind of death hits you, the kind of death which has a catastrophic impact in all directions, then suddenly you feel that, well, I certainly felt like I was in the world. In much the same way that Sun Ra is saying, until you realize that the world has ended, you don't know what's going on. So, there are many ways to think about time and the way it changes, but musicians, they deal with beginnings, endings, flow at different levels, but that sense of a sudden ending, it really does introduce you to a new sense of time.
Is there always a kind of loss in the moment that music is being made? Because sound, as you also say in your book, it dissolves like water on a rock. Do you think music contains loss inherently? I'm asking you.
I don't. I think that the act, the choices, the vibration is always a game. Always in movement is in action is life, and so I don't think so.
I like that positivity. I feel when I listen to something I love, I always think, I don't know, part of me becomes sad. I don't know, because I think of it in that live moment. But do you think the experience of music has changed, the loss in it changed in the recording era? I mean, this Does the fact of recorded music really preserve it? Or are recordings always haunted? What do you think? Are recordings haunted?
In what sense? I mean, yeah, recordings are always haunted because they're only speaking to like an element of the moment, you know? So the moment is always haunted, you know? And the moment is always subjective. It all falls into memory then 3 seconds after you do it, you know? So yeah, I mean, life is haunted and life is filled with grief, you know? And there are profound griefs and there are daily griefs. And, yeah, for sure recordings are haunted.
Personally, I think that for me, I'm a pretty melancholy mofo kind of guy. I kind of live in a melancholy state all the time. For me, I guess, is that too much sadness? I don't know. It does keep me, it keeps me centered. It keeps me in the moment. Am I a depressive guy? I don't know. I call it melancholy. I write music that I think speaks from that place. And when I had my profound loss with Kelly a few years back, I agree that being pulled into the moment deeper than I ever experienced before was a new place, you know, a new place to where everything that mattered, I thought, fell off. And that I was telling you before we came out here that I seek professional help to try to really learn how to grieve because I didn't know how. And so the professional I was going to turned to me, he said, I think you need to cherish the grief. And I said, excuse me, I'm tired of crying. I've been crying so much. It's been going on now for honestly for months. And he said, I know that, but if you cherish the grief that you're in right now, I guarantee you there will come a time where you won't be able to access it as deeply and as clearly and in the moment as you are now. So I think as it starts to come up and you start to get back to whatever happens once we do face the grief and cherish it, you'll be glad you did. And so that's just been my experience. Everybody wants to pull out of it, and as you say, get back to normal. Man, I wanted just to move on. But now I'm so grateful that I didn't.
Steve, can you share the story? I know many people know it in this room, but of Making Traces and how it came about.
It's a complex record because there was 2 songs I wrote that were about profound grief. One called In the Rain, which is the darkness of grief, sitting, you know, pictures that stare back in silence by myself. The other one is a song called Most of All, which is a little bit more uplifting, but still about loss. But those songs were written before I had met Kelly, which was really bizarre.
Yeah.
And they were so profoundly about loss that I was afraid to play them for her when she was struggling to win her battle against cancer, because I didn't want to put that energy into her struggle. So that's the only thing I kept from her, was those 2 songs I had written before I met her. So after she had passed away, I went back to my hard drive and found them and went, wow, these songs feel like they were about her before I met her.
Let's hear a little bit of In the Rain. You can do that by titles, right? My nice sound person.
I wish you were here tonight, sitting here beside me. I wish you were here tonight, instead you got me, even though you're gone. I wish you could see all those faces chasing shadows now. Here in the dark, am I losing you again? All hope was lost once before.
Turn you
song.
on, Steve Perry.
I know. Excellent, Steve. Excellent.
So for those who don't know, Kelly Nash was your partner. And did she have cancer when you met her?
When I met her, she had been fighting cancer for about 3 years, but you'd never know it. She looked amazing. And we just had this connection, something I never experienced before, and I just couldn't stay away from her. And so we were together for a year and a half, and we fought it together. And it was frightening because it was facing potentials, falling in love with potentials of loss on the front end. It was something insane to me, but honestly, I had nowhere to go because that's all I wanted. I wanted to just be there, you know.
And so you started writing that song before. And
I wrote that song way before I met her. No, I wrote that song way before I met her. And it was about profound loss, because I have loss in my life. We all have loss. That's what's so amazing. I know you're here to meet everybody, but I know you're here because you've had loss.
Yes.
Nobody in this room, if you're alive, doesn't have loss.
That's right.
And yet we don't want to talk about it or embrace it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Really. And that's, to me, important. I mean, really important.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. So David, in Flutter Echo, you write about the aftermath of your wife's death in 1995, Kimberly, and how it affected both your prose style and your music making process. And you write about a track, and I just want to play it. It's quite different than the one we just heard. Can you play Ceremony, please?
and they dressed as demon pirates. Well aware of my needs, they gave me access to the iron slit. I saw 6 creatures sitting in a circle, features barely visible. They passed a container round, refilling it and drinking more, groaning as the liquid spilled from the corners of their mouths, running like blood in the glue, soaking their naked torsos, darkening the floor, spreading stains. Saturated, unable to speak, the leader gestured for them to stop. They picked up a broad, heavy wooden
I
disc.
hate to cut it. You need to listen to the whole thing, but it's an amazing piece of music. The whole title is Ceremony Future Iron Slit. Can you talk a little bit about I'm not going to even frame the question. Tell us a little bit about that composition.
Well, I think the thing to say is that my wife's death was a suicide, a very sudden one. And we had a daughter who was just about to be 5 years old. So I was plunged into a situation of dealing with suicide. I'm sure there are many suicide survivors among us here. But it's not an easy thing to deal with. But I also was faced with the responsibility of parenting our child alone, and inevitably that involves you in many mundane things, getting her ready for school and all of this kind of thing, making sure she's fed and so on. But then on the other side of that, the need for positivity, if you like, the need for responsible behavior is the imagery that is drawn out by the impact of suicide. And I found that both writing and music making were extremely cathartic in that sense. So that piece really is dealing with some of my, I suppose, darker feelings. These feelings that it's actually impossible to share with anybody else, because if you talk about this stuff openly, people are very shocked, They don't, in a way, people are encouraging you into, Steve said this earlier, they're encouraging you into a sense of normality. But this whole process takes a lot of time, and it will draw you into areas which are unpalatable, I suppose. And music is a gift in that sense, that you can reconcile yourself and to some degree other people by dealing with them through music. So in a way it's hard for me to say exactly what that piece is about, but it's definitely about this passage through grief after dealing with a death like that.
I was really struck in your account of that period of your life, of some of the things you had to do with your daughter, like she had a birthday party, like right away after that.
Yeah, she had a birthday party. I was organizing a funeral and a birthday party at the same time. And, that pulls you in exactly this polarity that I'm talking about. And I think, things like writing and music, they can help you process all of that. So it's not that, the process of grieving becomes the point of the music, but these profound and often very unfamiliar and disturbing emotions and psychological states can kind of work themselves out through the music. And I think other people who've gone through that experience, they can recognize that. It's, this question of sound and loss. I ended up developing a whole theory about sound as the embodiment of loss. Now, I agree with what Ishmael says, that when you're working with sound, when you're making music, you're always making something, and that is extremely positive. So this idea of loss as being a negative thing is an example, I think, of our fearfulness about death, because death is a reality, loss is a reality. Yeah, it's something we all experience. And nostalgia is a good example. If you look on YouTube, so many clips you look at, people are saying, oh, why don't they make music like this anymore? When I was young, this was great music, nothing compares to it. And every genre of music, that kind of nostalgia is one of the ways in which people engage with music. It touches them, it's meaningful. So, that sense of loss, I think, it's just a reality of life, and music helps us deal with it.
Yes.
I'm thinking of Steve, you and Kelly knowing the potential of loss from the beginning of your relationship must have given you that profound insight into this reality of loss as a part of every day. And Efrim, you have you made a group that in some ways existed as a form of expressing loss and memorializing, the Mount Zion group, which really has explored this area in many different ways. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah, I mean, the band's, I mean, speaking of the aftermath of what was just spoken of, this is gonna sound very small, but the band was formed after my dog died, which seems like a very small thing, but
Laurie Anderson also made a work about that, actually.
Okay.
You're in good company.
But for me, like I had led this very isolated childhood, and then left home very early, and was, you know, sort of running in the streets with other kids. So I had no attachments, and I had this dog Wanda, and when she died, that was my formative grief experience, which is strange and a little pathetic, but it's true, you know. Like it was my first experience in that way.
Common also, though, I think, especially for
Yes.
young people.
Yeah, except I was, you know, I was in my late 20s at that point. You know what I
That's
mean?
young.
It speaks more to what my life had been up to that point, you know?
Common among musicians, maybe you're indie musicians anyway.
Yeah, maybe.
Or some I've known.
And up until that point, like my entire experience of music had been, you know, music as a social activity that was sort of recorded and documented, kind of like writing things down in a notebook and throwing them into a random puddle and hoping that someone found them, you know? So in the aftermath of Wanda dying, who, in my defense, she was a beautiful and rare creature, it seemed to make sense to have this social activity in the aftermath. And again, just writing things down in a notebook, throwing them in a puddle, abandoning them and moving on, you know? And so yeah, then the thesis of the band became to keep sort of memorializing big and small death, you know? And sort of marking the passage of time and continuing to write things down in notebooks and throwing them, abandoning them to puddles.
How did you decide what else? Because there are songs grieving friends, there are songs grieving sort of larger strangers, I guess, you know, in the group.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, it was what the, you know, what made sense in the moment, you know? I mean, there's plenty of grief in this world, you know, and we all experience it constantly, you know? And I do agree, it has to be, in some ways it has to be normalized, you know? It has to be honored, but I think the best way to honor it is to normalize it, you know? We're all, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of emotions there. But we all have a hard time when someone we know is experiencing grief and we can't share it with them. We can't carry the grief with them, you know? And I don't know, it needs to be normalized, you know? We need to find the common words, and we need to find new words. Because the fact is, given the historical moment, there are gonna be many more deaths, you know? Yeah. We need to find new words.
I know that your music is influenced by Jewish traditions, and I wondered if you looked to, if there's a, you know, all religions express grieving in their core, at their core. And as I said before, there are some who think that religion would not exist if not for grieving, that is actually the historical, prehistorical source of the religious impulse. But I'm wondering, especially in the Jewish tradition of Kaddish, and you know, how that factors in to your music making.
I mean, I don't believe in God, so let's start with that.
Many Jewish people don't.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's something, the Jewish idea of God is this sort of, I mean, God is this drama queen, you know? It's this irrational creature who casts apocalypse upon the earth randomly and, you know, holds long grudges. You know? I had this weird thing last year. I went out, there's a very strange bar, there's a Greek bar on my corner that's, it's like an illegal gambling joint. And I couldn't sleep one night and I went to my front porch to have a cigarette. And I walked to my front porch and there was a man lying in the street crying and in the way of traffic. So I ran up to him and I said, "Are you okay, brother?" And he had lost a bunch of money in this bar joint. And then immediately this other guy started making drama. All the bookies fled from the Greek joint. The police showed up, and then this old Greek man. I was standing there just confused, smoking my cigarette, and this old Greek man started speaking to me in Greek, and I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm not Greek." And he looked at me and he said, "Jewish?" And I didn't think that Jews will understand it, but like, oh shit, you know, like what form of weirdness is coming? And then all he wanted to speak to me about was the Old Testament, and then we got in this hour-long debate about the Book of Job, right? And it was basically a debate because the Christian ideal of God, the moral that he gave for the Book of Job was that you need to have faith, right? And I was trying to tell him, like, fuck that, brother. You know? The moral of the Book of Job is you're gonna have faith, and God at some point is gonna take some random fucking bets, you know? Fuck up your life, you know? Just to prove a fucking point, you know? And we got into this thing, and it lasted, and it was an okay debate, but anyways, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Judaism. Is, you know, I do believe in the idea, you know, if you're gonna make a god, I mean, fuck God, you know, but if you're gonna make a god, it should at least represent the fact that the world is random and brutal and violent and people fucking die. And it's a fucking nightmare, you know? So you might as well, like, God should live in that world, you know? Of just random and brutal and petty, you know?
And is music a bridge? Is music a bridge to that? Is music a bridge to that world? Or is it a way of coping with that world? Or both? Or a channel? I don't know. I think about, like, the angels in America, you know, one of the great works about plague and grieving and how violent they are and how kind of horrible the angel is,
Right.
you know? And I think that's a great reclamation of a certain reality through art.
I mean, this is a subjective reality I'm speaking to, not an objective reality, but I think, like, if you don't, I always feel like a good place to start is things are shit, you know? And any joy needs to come from that thesis, you know? Like, you can't deny it, you know? Otherwise, what the fuck are you gonna experience in this world, you know? If you just, yeah. Anyways,
From the mud grows the lotus, but from the mud grows the lotus.
I'm not familiar with
Actually, what Efrim was talking about actually miraculously goes well into my next question, which is for you. You know, when I listen to Shabazz Palaces, I hear so much. One thing I hear is a strain, an undertone. I don't know if I would call it sorrow, I would call it haunting, or there is a sense, and especially on these two most recent records, there's an overtone of questioning and challenging our values in the contemporary 21st century world, of a certain alienation from the status quo, and within that, not a grief, but a challenge. Some theorists might call this Afro-pessimism, and there is a strain in music and in theory about that. The idea of, well, I don't know, maybe Daphne could talk about it. Yeah, one moment. But as you confront the dystopian aspects of our culture, how does your music incorporate responses to loss and death, whether they're individual deaths or more cultural death and decay?
My most profound grief since experience with it is my mother, Barbara. She passed away. And me and her were tight, and we were good friends. I learned everything that I've knew in my formative years from not just what she told me, but what I saw her doing. When she passed away, I remember people, telling me they were sorry for my loss, but I was sorry for her loss because she was good at living. So I didn't really think of it as me losing because she had lost life, and she was good at it. So my grief was attached to her and what she lost. And then it was sad for me, obviously, and I had a very long period of grief, and it was dark for me. I made music during that time, which became the music of Shabazz Palaces. But what I figured out was she made me. You know, I was made out of her essence. So I was essentially living her life, continuing her life. You know, so I am sorrow. I'm full of sorrow about that. It doesn't dissipate over the years. It rises up, swells all the time. But knowing that she was good at life, and I could sort of, when she passed, a new relationship between she and I was born, in which all of the experiences that I had with her, and grief deals a lot with memory and the active memory of things. And so I remember her all the time, and I feel like I'm living her life, you know, in another realm, another incarnation of it. So we still roll together. You know?
And that's not Afro-pessimism.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm definitely not an Afro-pessimist at all.
Good.
Well, can you tell? I want to play a cut from one of the Quasars records, but tell for the audience, tell a little bit about the world building that happens on those records, the worlds you build on those records.
Well, I'm 50, so I wasn't around with the personal device, you know, and the application of it and the proliferation of it. So I've always approached it very warily, you know, and my participation with it and my observation of it is kind of with squinted eyes, you know. So the world that Quasars is coming from is kind of that world, you know, where I accept everything. I'm not the type of person that wants to go back to the old days and I want the youth to pull their pants up and all that kind of stuff. I'm with the shit. I like all the new stuff, but I remember the essence of where I came from, and so it's weird to me. These times are weird as hell, you know? So that's where Quasars is coming from.
Let's hear us welcome to Quasar.
Behold the soft cyber caress, my television, who's my lover. The jealous machines and devices struggle to find the light switch.